Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is Aaron here at Future Retrospect, and I have Josh with me today to discuss The Expanse Season 2. So, we already did episode 1. If you haven't seen that, I'll provide a link below for you to watch that as well. So, we knew coming into this one that there was going to be a lot to discuss potentially, and that's very much the case. So, I really want to dive into this right away. But before we do that, Josh, I want to get both of our kind of overall thoughts, reactions to the season. So, as somebody myself who has only seen up to season 2, you've seen all the seasons, but I've been rewatching. Where does season 2 for you kind of land in the hierarchy of things in terms of when you think of the show as a whole?
Season 2 has some big moments, and there's a lot about the season I really love, but it's probably in the lower half for all of the
Okay.
seasons for me. There's just so much good stuff ahead that the amazing stuff in this season just gets left behind.
Well, I'm super excited because I really enjoyed this season. I enjoyed the first season as well, but this was just like way up a notch in terms of the amount of things. Like so many things happen in this season that could have been their own seasons. I feel like in terms of like the stakes that happen. So I just want to jump right into it. So I'm just taking a quick look at my notes here. So one of the first things that happen in this season is the more detail around the proto molecule. So they do go to the research station and find uh, Cortazar, I believe his name is the
Mhm.
guy that they end up abducting because they accidentally kill a bunch of guys who were seemingly doing some sort of research. That was unfortunate, but they do find Dresden, who was the what appears to be the mastermind behind these experiments and has kind of a very interesting take on his experiments in terms of the humanity behind it. So, what was your reaction? And I guess the reaction to, I thought it was cool in terms of when they caught him. I was like, this is going to be awesome. We're going to get a ton of detail. And we get this huge twist of Miller shooting him in the head once he kind of goes through his little monologue. And I just have to say, for that completely caught me off guard in terms of like, I thought that was going to be like a huge uh, storyline for the show was, oh, they're gonna, try to get some information out of him. Maybe he's gonna help him out a little bit. Ultimately, that ends up being Cortazar a little bit. But what was your reaction? Because when he shot him, I was like, what? Like this totally changes everything. So what was your reaction seeing it the second time, or even the first time? What did you
The
think?
first time. Yeah, I'll go the first time first. Yeah, similarly, I had the same mindset the first time I was watching it, where it's like, okay, here we go. We're gonna get some info. We're gonna know what's going on. Stuff's gonna make sense. But the thing I love about this show is that the characters always act the way they would
Mm,
behave. They do
yeah.
not like the way the books are written, and thus the show is put together. Is characters do things that make sense to the character, and that's 100% something that Miller would do. He is,
Hmm.
he sees things as they are and he does what he thinks needs to be done. And post the loss of Julie, which we'll circle back and touch on that
Yeah.
because yeah, that was big. But post that loss, he really just gives zero f's. And yeah, it blew my mind, pardon the pun. But the second time through, knowing it was coming, I really appreciated the buildup because that whole raid on that station, that was the purpose that they were going there. They were going there to get the information. So you have that buildup. And I think about season 8 or the last season of Game of Thrones with that whole thing that they tried to do with, subverting expectations. Done
Sure.
poorly in Game of Thrones, done brilliantly here. Really loved that scene. Made me love Miller even more.
Yeah, I have to agree with you that at least assuming we don't see Miller again, certainly seems like something his character would do. So you can be mad at him in the context of the story as a viewer, but you're like, yeah, it totally makes sense that he would do it. And I'm glad you brought up Julie because of the discovery of her in her, I don't know if it was her apartment, but wherever they had discovered her, where the proto molecule had, ultimately killed her. Certainly
Mhm.
was a big turning point for his character. I don't want to say obviously not closure at that point, but it certainly I think put him over the edge in terms of how he felt about the whole
Yeah,
situation.
man, he's a character that gets, double closure. So it was, but
Yeah.
at that point, he's like, I'm just doing what I got to do here. I'm one of these belters now, I guess, which is great
Hmm.
because you had that last season where he's wrestling with his identity as a belter and fully embracing it. one of the most belter things to do in that situation, putting a bullet in the man's head.
Yeah, and I have to say and it wasn't necessarily again another very surprising thing, but the stuff with Cortazar and the where they removed I don't remember what part of his brain where that
Yeah.
processes empathy. I thought that was an interesting. It makes sense for what they were doing, but also just like a very he didn't seem overly concerned about it that happened. He seemed like a necessary evil for everybody working on
Yeah.
that, but definitely a
Well,
puts
once
into
it's removed
context
from
the
your
extreme.
brain, you don't care
But
about
that's
that.
true.
Once,
That
yeah,
yeah,
once the empathy's gone, it's like, yeah, the choice to remove empathy from people, once you have already had your own empathy removed, that's a no-brainer. Again,
yeah,
pardon the pun.
right. Yeah, and it certainly puts a scale onto what they were doing. If like in order to work on this, we need to literally remove their ability to be to empathize because of the implications and the amount of people that will probably be harmed. But obviously, ultimately, they believe that what they're doing is going to be a
Yep.
benefit to humanity, but there's going to be a
Yep.
lot of bloodshed in the meanwhile.
Which is why it made perfect sense. He was making sense, even as a viewer, as you're listening to him during his villainous mustache twirling monologue. You're
Yep.
listening to him and you're like, okay, yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from. And like that is so effective. Like even the
Mhm.
audience is like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see maybe we viewed this whole proto molecule thing the wrong way. And maybe, now we're gonna view it the right way according to this guy. And the fact that it's working on the audience and the people in that scene. Is it Fred Johnson in that scene, or is he
I think Fred
um
Johnson was there. Yeah.
anyway, and for sure Holden was there, right, and some other
Hmm.
people, but
Yeah.
like, yeah, Miller saw the room, he saw that they were starting to nod along and go along with it, and that's why he had to stop it, is because he
Yeah.
realized it made sense.
He's like, all right, that's enough, and literally
Hmm.
just takes it out. So yeah,
Yep.
it is one of those situations where yeah, you look back on, and there's obviously been parts of in the world's history where there's been horrific things that happen, and you hear the reasons behind them, and they're awful, but you're like, I
Hmm.
guess in the context in which they're trying to do it, you can understand why they did it, even if it's something
Yeah,
you would never do, and
absolutely.
it's a terrible thing. So
That's
another
always the
great,
danger, is context.
yeah,
Context is always the danger.
right.
You can justify anything, like, by knowing the context behind a monster, like,
Mhm.
understanding it is not the same as justifying it, but it's so dangerous even just getting to that point of understanding, because then you can start to excuse stuff that you shouldn't excuse.
Yeah, so big that set the tone for the season for me in a lot of way in terms of where I thought it was going at that moment
Mhm.
when they captured him and then we shot him. So one of my and I knew we would and you told me we would get back to the Mormons.
Yeah.
So I was excited that they were very early on in the season in regards to the Nauvoo and the what I guess would be the hijacking of the Nauvoo, where they
Yeah.
plan to take out Aero Station to destroy the molecule. And I was just like, wait a second, is this really what they're going to do? They're going to crash the Nauvoo into Aero Station. And this is another, again, where this was like maybe 3 or 4 episodes into the season. I was like, this could have been this could have been the conclusion of the season.
Totally.
And if my
So
understanding is it's the ending of the first book, is
you
that
got it.
correct?
That is
Okay.
correct. Yep. So it was weird how they split up the seasons that way. I felt 5 more episodes, because I think it was episode 5 where we have
I think so.
what we'll get to talking about in a bit. But that
Hmm.
was, a book, and that would have made sense to put that season all together. And in later seasons, they start treating every book as a season. But yeah,
Okay.
splitting it there, it was season 1 ended at a weird place, and then you had this
A
weird
bit. Yeah.
first half of season 2, and then something totally different happening at the second half of season 2.
Yeah. It is almost like a mini season in a way, like wrapping up. I really enjoyed it just because so much more happened after as well. But yeah, pretty crazy uh plot line in terms of I was like, wow, we're 4 episodes in, 4 or 5 episodes in, and this crazy thing's about to happen. So
Hmm.
they hijack Fred Johnson basically hijacks the Nauvoo, gets them
I mean, it's
all
his ship, right? He,
it is a ship. He built it, but I mean like
yeah.
he like under false pretenses like took it over, was like, y'all have to evacuate for whatever his reasoning, and then takes off and potential consequences around that. I just thought it was
Yeah.
hilarious because they were obviously very upset about that, but he was just like, yeah, whatever, we're just going to take this
Yeah.
massive, the biggest ship ever made,
Yeah.
and do this crazy thing that Holden had an idea for. So
Yeah.
I
But
was kind of like, I didn't think, yeah,
once you realize what the point of having the Nauvoo being introduced is for, you're like, are
yeah.
you serious? And again, we'll get to the subverting expectations in a second here, but A
Yeah,
very,
absolutely.
very good use of the Navu as a plot device.
Yeah, so I'm just taking another quick look at my notes here around. So one of the major things that happens with Eros is the protomolecule seemingly taking over the entire station in terms of moving it, powering it, seems to have a mind of its own. That's kind of the first time we really see what the potential of the protomolecule is in regards to, it's a very vague concept at this point in terms of what it could do. Or end of the season, we see the station slowly getting taken over, but we don't really know what the implications are. And I believe my theory at the time that you had me give was like, what do you think the protomolecule is? Was basically like, I think it's some like hybrid, um, like biological, technologically morphed thing, which I think is pretty accurate to say at this point in terms of what it is, in
Hmm.
regards to it being a living thing that can also control technology. Or I'm not describing it very well, but that seems to be pretty accurate. Sorry, go ahead.
It's
You
a
have some.
weird thing that's happening with, because it's an asteroid. Eros is an asteroid,
True.
and
Yeah.
it suddenly is moving without engines or anything. So when that started happening, I want to know how your that previous theory, what started happening as you were trying to contextualize what you're seeing
Yeah.
with now this asteroid is speeding up, moving out of the way. What is going on? Like what
Yeah.
did you think?
So I think and I believe it was a scene, one of the political scenes where they're like in the war room trying to figure out what's going on, and they talk about the asteroid it moved in a way that wasn't in their mind something that was possible given current technologies. And they're like, is this Mars? Does Mars have a better thing? And my reaction was certainly like, oh, wait a second, like this thing has the power, like not only the energy to be able to power what it would take to make that sort of movement, to your point, the context being an entire asteroid, but also the implications of what that meant for everything else in terms of where they could go. So I was like, okay, don't really know what to expect from this in terms of what this could mean. But yeah, certainly put a at least a very high ceiling in terms of what the potential of the protomolecule was in terms of what it's able to do. So I was certainly not expecting that level of competency from the protomolecule in terms of its ability to sense and make these changes based off of danger, kind of like its own spidey sense to an
Really?
extent.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way of explaining it. I'm trying to remember, because you've watched this season more recently than I, but we had those snippets of scenes from the guy who made the Epstein drive. Do you remember if that was
Yes,
happening at the same time as so like when Arrow started moving, was that in those episodes or did that come later in the season? I'm trying to remember.
that is a good question. I don't remember exactly when they landed because I remember really liking those because it was really cool to see the discovery or the
Hmm.
invention of the Epstein drive. But that might have been shortly after the it landed on Venus,
Yeah.
I believe. So,
Well,
but
because the
it was
reason I
around the same time though. So
the reason I bring it up is because you have that great juxtaposition where you have, okay,
yeah.
here's mankind's highest achievement, the Epstein
Mm,
drive, the thing that made the whole premise of this of the story of the expansion into the outer planets possible is this miracle engine that can go crazy without somehow
fuel
like the fuel
efficiency, yeah.
limitation. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so that's the peak of mankind. And then we see this thing, the proto-molecule,
It's a
completely
great
put
point.
that to
Yeah.
shame. Yeah. So that juxtaposition for me was like, oh, wow. Like this is, and I love those scenes for the same reason where it's like, this is so far beyond. Like this is a breakthrough technology or something's going on here that's just completely out of the solar system. And I loved those scenes for that reason because it really did put in to context. An asteroid is moving by itself. What is going on?
And I have to ask you, this is just a side question, somewhat related to the show. So, as somebody who loves anything about aliens, how did you feel about the idea of a show showing something, maybe not a UFO, but showing something that could move on its own, this reaction? Because we're seeing a lot of that in our world now in terms of we have high level officers saying like, we can't confirm it officially, but there are things we've seen that we can't explain in terms of
Hmm.
how they're moving. We have the technology doesn't currently exist. How does that, when you watch that, did that come across? Did you think about that at all when you were rewatching the season? Kind of like is this kind of what's going on, or
Oh, you
what was
know
your
it.
thought?
Oh, you know it. Yeah, of course.
I
Those
had to ask because
synapses
I
in my
thought
brain were
about you when
making
it happened. I was
connections.
like, seems like something Josh would be
Yeah.
thinking about right now.
Well,
Like,
I
oh yeah,
I look at The Expanse as a more realistic Star Trek, where
yeah,
Star Trek is this completely impossible future. The Expanse, of course, is a impossible future as well, but it's a more realistic one. It's at least
hmm
within, uh, what could be possible.
yeah.
And
It's very
so, like,
grounded. Yeah,
yeah, it's very grounded. And so you have that moment where there's been a couple, like the introduction of the protomolecule from last season was kind of pushing the boundaries of what's possible with current understandings of physics. And then you have this happen, and you're like, okay, did the show just step into sci fi territory? Are we in Star
yeah.
Trek territory now?
hmm
Is that what's happening? And I'm not going to expand on that point because I don't want to get into spoilers, but that's very much what was
Sure.
going through my mind the first time was that, oh, okay, this is now, we're in Star Trek territory. Anything's possible now.
Yeah, that is. That's a very good point because to everything you're saying, everything, and that's what, again, another reason, given only the 2 seasons I've watched, I love the show too, is everything seems possible. Like there's nothing that has happened so far in the season, technology wise, ship wise, where you're like, well, that's ridiculous. That could never happen. It's
Mhm.
very much obviously way in the future in terms of if it could happen, but very realistic. And the protomolecule is kind of the first, well, to them, it's the first any exposure to other life, other things outside of humankind, which is interesting because anytime there's anything like this type of show, you'd expect there to be aliens in it, but
Yeah.
there's not. So to them, there's like, yeah, there's nothing else really out there in terms of living, high intellect beings out there. So
Mhm.
they're even kind of dealing with the thought of like, oh, there is something else out there, and we
Mhm.
are
Yeah,
finally
it's a
encountering it.
very different approach to the idea of first contact where, yeah, we do expect like, okay, our first contact is going to be whatever these, flying things that the military is seeing. Those are aliens, and sometime they're going to make themselves known to us, and that'll be first contact. When, more realistically, maybe it's something completely, like I think about the Umamu or whatever it's called, that that long cigar-shaped asteroid that flew through
Oh
our
yeah, yeah,
solar system. Like maybe that was first contact, and we didn't even know about it. So it's like subtle things are probably more realistic to put on my tinfoil hat for a little bit here. But uh, yeah, I'm careful to say too much about the protomolecule just because
yeah,
obviously it's developed later in seasons, so I don't want to go too much into
sure,
that. But
yeah.
um, you'll have to remind me where what information's been shared in season 2, just so I
Gotcha.
don't spoil anything for you.
Yeah, no, sounds good. So we'll hop into the next part. So again, another major thing. So protomolecules taking over Eros. The asteroid's moving on its own, seems to have a mind of its own. And we find out that it is heading towards Earth at a very quick rate. So Earth is trying to figure out what's going on. They think it's Mars has found some new technology that they're starting to use towards Earth because there's some tensions between them. We have the Rossi crew trying to figure out how they can help. They're trying to keep the station within their sight. I remember that scene very well. They had like to push their um, ship to the max because the Earth has unleashed some nuclear warheads to try to do whatever damage they can to keep this thing from
Mhm.
going. And then, of course, they lose trace of those nukes. And then we get this fun little political game where Fred Johnston says, "Hey, I can help guide those nuclear warheads, and the Rossi can help keep it within our view so that we can keep a hold on it." And that kind of introduces obviously these great scenes on Earth where they're trying to decide. Well, Fred Johnson's just trying to take advantage of the situation. He's not going to help. He's not trying to do that. So I really like that, and I think the show has done a great job so far with that, with these really tense moments and putting these characters in really dire situations, even if it is political in the sense of them having these conversations. So I really enjoyed the scenes with Christian and Aaron Wright and what I believe is basically the president of the Earth. We
Yeah,
don't
I
see him a
forget his
ton,
name, the white-haired guy.
which is funny because they don't like really. He's not in it a lot. He's just kind of randomly there to make decisions. But really enjoyed those scenes. But yeah, what did you think about that when we found out heading towards Earth and then they have to deal with, is it Mars? Do we attack Mars? Do we send warheads? Do we trust Fred Johnson? Like, what was your thoughts going into that
Mhm.
whole circumstance.
Yeah, another thing I love about the show so much is the political intrigue, the political
Mhm.
drama, the chess pieces on the board being moved around with not just two players, but you have like six or seven players at this chessboard moving pieces around. A great moment there where game theory plays out, where their Earth's only choice really is to trust Fred Johnson.
Yep.
And Fred Johnson's only choice really is to not let them have the nukes back. So like they both know what's going to happen, and they realize,
Right.
well, we have to do this because what else can we do?
Right.
And just like it's a great moment because there's no alternatives. They don't have any other options. They can, you know, hope for the best. I think at that point, are they starting to evacuate Earth too? Like they're taking it really
I
seriously.
believe Christian says something about that, like we need to start evacuating Earth, and they did start evacuating Earth because I know
Hmm.
Christian ultimately decides to stay behind even if it crashes, kind of thing.
Right.
So
So
some
like
scenes with her and her husband, yeah.
they have worst case scenario on the board, and they know exactly what's going to happen, and they realize they have to do it anyway. So a really great moment. uh I think it's like the second or third great political moment in the show so far. And another thing I can promise you, there will be loads more moments like that, but that was a really great
Great.
one.
And the one thing major thing I guess that hasn't come up was that Miller was on the station basically the entire time trying
Oh yeah,
to
yep,
the
right.
initial mission
Yeah,
to
yeah.
blow it up. So that's just
Mhm.
wanted to bring that up because that's obviously a major stepping stone into the next
'Cause
point of Miller.
there were two parts of their plan to hit the asteroid with,
Yep.
the Nauvoo, and then
Yep.
they're setting the charges, and I don't really remember why they were doing that.
I,
That's been a while. Do you remember what the point of that was?
yeah,
Was that just an
somebody,
extra boost
yeah,
or something?
I believe it was an extra boost to get it to a specific area. So definitely let us know down in the comments if
Yeah, I
that's
don't
correct
remember.
or
That
not.
seemed like a little
Um,
bit like, do they need to be there? But
yeah, it was early in the season, so I apologize for not remembering that. But definitely, again, let us know if that's correct. But something along those lines. There was a reason they needed to get the charges on. Miller gets, he's behind because he's got to do the last charge, and there's issues.
mm,
So,
yeah, the
um,
classic dilemma of it not working correctly and needing to be
correct, yeah,
manual.
and yeah. So a little tropey, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Because we get a great scene or great scenes with Miller entering into Eros
Mhm.
with the protomolecule everywhere, and then thought the CGI looked great in that moment, very beautiful in terms of him walking through the halls. And excited to talk about this part with you. So he does find Julie, or what appears to be Julie, reanimated by the protomolecule. Quick side note, because this was brought up in our first episode, we do see the bird,
We do.
which I know you called out saying the first time you watched it, you thought you were like, oh, something's going on with this bird because we keep seeing this mechanical
Mhm.
bird every time he's in like Julie's apartment.
No,
And we
that's a
do,
real bird when he sees it the first time.
yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. It is
Yep.
real the first time.
Mhm.
Yep. But again, we do see a bird on Aero Station. I just brought that up because I remember thinking, like, oh yeah, Josh brought that up.
Mhm.
But again, I don't think we see anything else about that specifically, but I'm assuming we will. But a side note, so we do. So Miller goes, he finds the center of the ship. Julie Mao's there, uh, guiding the station. Appears to be the protomolecule is doing this through her. Her mind is controlling it in the sense of the reason it's going towards Earth is because she wants to go home. She was
Mhm.
scared. She doesn't know what's going on. And that's
Mhm.
another great moment to show you're like this massive, powerful energy, and it's being controlled by, a human girl who's scared, who,
Mhm.
got caught up in this big um, fight that she, believed in, but now she doesn't, now she's kind of passed on, but is still alive. Just really crazy when you think about it in terms of like the reasoning behind why everything that was happening and the power that was happening with her doing that. So I thought that was pretty crazy and a really great, and again, I say send off for Miller in the sense that just leaving the door open that he somehow will see him again. Don't know what that would look like, but just seems like a really important character to potentially kill off, but we'll see. So obviously you can't say anything.
Can't and
Um,
won't.
Right, exactly. And I wouldn't want you to, but
Yeah.
yeah, again, what were you thinking when he walked into that room and you see Julie there, naked? She's on this like what appears to be controlling the ship. She doesn't understand what's
Mhm.
going on. Did you think that was really her? Do you think that was just a proto molecule manipulating the situation?
Yeah. first time I watched it, I kind of felt like maybe the proto molecule was trying to manipulate Miller. I
Mhm.
was like, maybe it's just taking this form. But then, when you start to realize, like you said, it's going to Earth because Julie wants to go home, then it starts to sink in. Oh, there's at least part of her very much still
Yeah,
there, which is creepy and terrifying to like,
absolutely.
die and then have your consciousness be part of whatever this thing is
Mhm.
expressing itself. Um, and I think there was part of that scene where she was like, she said she couldn't really feel anything. So she like has the body, but is
Right.
very much at some level aware that she's either dead or things are very, very bad for her.
Mhm.
So a really touching scene. Like,
Yeah.
it's a little bit like Miller's a little bit creepy. He's been
Yeah.
hunting this hunting this younger girl for a what not hunting as in like, but like trying to track down this younger girl for a while, and then he finally finds her. Um, but a very touching scene. Like he fell in love with her without meeting her, and so this is the first time he's actually meeting her,
Mhm.
and it's kind of a dream ending for him in some ways. He gets the girl. uh, another trope that's a little bit subverted here, but that's
Yeah.
basically what happens.
Yeah, it
So
certainly is, I guess, the word tragic in the sense of finally getting to that moment, and it's a suicide mission essentially to
yeah.
I need to convince this consciousness of Julie to not destroy Earth and to go somewhere else. Said
Mhm.
Venus. Not 100% sure why he chose that, other than I'm guessing the just closest available.
Yeah, it's weird
Um,
why it went there instead of the sun or something, but
True.
yeah, I mean, there's some mythological reasons why it would go to Venus, like Eros is, forget if it's the Greek or Roman name, but anyway, Venus, I think, is the Roman name for Aphrodite, and, Eros is in
Yeah.
Roman
Eros is the Greek god of
Cupid.
erotic love. It says, yeah, Cupid.
Yep, Cupid, and Cupid is Venus's son. So the episode's called
Okay.
"Going Home." So it's like, okay, Eros is going home to his
Yeah.
mother, essentially. So I mean, there's that going on there, but like outside of a literary sense, it's like maybe that's just the nearest large gravity well to dive this thing into.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, I don't think it would destroy itself, so the sun was probably not an option. So it was probably just looking for a place to crash that could,
Right.
withstand it without being destroyed
That's a
itself.
good point. It kind of shows that maybe the protomolecule has some control, but also interesting that it doesn't have complete control in the sense that Julie ultimately was deciding it's where it was heading, but maybe it had enough control to be like, oh, I'm not going to go somewhere that's going to completely destroy the essence of the protomolecule. So
Right.
that's an
Yeah.
interesting way to think about it. But so long story short, it does land on Venus. And of course, it's kind of like, okay, well, that's obviously probably not going to be the end of what we see of the Eros crash. So wasn't surprised to see that later in the season, which
But
we'll bring up a little bit.
that was a mind-blowing moment. It crashing into Venus blew my mind. The first time I
It
watched it, I was like,
Yeah,
"Whoa. This
and it looked
show, what is this
awesome.
show do?" It looked amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember thinking that in terms of like when the scene happened, it crashed again. It was one of those moments where I was like, we're only 5 episodes into the season, and
Mhm.
this just happened, and it looks amazing. So it
Yeah.
was a mind blowing thing because I was like, we still have like 8 episodes to go, so I have
Yeah.
no idea where this is gonna go. So
It's a little
uh,
funny. I had watched the first season by myself and up through, that episode by myself. And then when that moment happened, I was like, oh, I got to tell my wife about this show. This is amazing. And then I rewatched season one up to that moment again
oh
with her
gosh,
because I was like, oh, this is amazing. So that
that's
was
awesome.
really the winning over moment for me of the show.
Yeah, I would say that certainly sticks out as a major moment. I liked the show, but that certainly bumped it up another level of like, okay, like they're not afraid to really raise the stakes in terms of what the potential consequences are and what could potentially happen, because it could have been, not knowing what happens in the books, a much safer plot in terms of we're going to
Yeah.
move an entire station to block a station, and then it's going to take over and go towards Earth and crash. It's just like, when you
Yep.
really try to explain to somebody what's happening, it's a pretty insane uh, uh, events that happened leading up to that point. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up around just how mind blowing that moment was, because it really is just like, it could have been, again, could have been the end of a season one, but in terms of pacing, I certainly was fine with it and
Yep.
everything that led up to it. But another turning point of that middle part of the season is the proto-molecule sample that they do have. They decide that given this situation, we need to get rid of every possible piece of this as we can. And what they decide that they're going to take what they have and shoot it into the sun and just be gone with it and hunt down anything else they can have. But we get just a very, very short scene. I believe it was right at the end of the whatever episode it was, probably episode 6, I'm guessing, since that was right after the crash of Eros. We see Naomi take her hand away, and she does not get rid of the proto-molecule. And at the time, I didn't exactly understand what her intention was, but we do ultimately find out she is she's a Belter at heart, and she wants the Belters to have a chance in whatever war is going to happen. But yeah, what did you think? Did you think she had it in her to do that? Because I certainly didn't necessarily think that, but it was a huge turning point for her character until the end of the season, deciding to go against the crew and, of course, James Holden, who, they're lovers, I believe, at that point. So pretty crazy thing for her to do.
Yeah, it made sense though. Like she's much more of a realist than James Holden. James Holden
Yeah.
is this idealist,
Yeah.
always tilting at windmills, always the knight going up against things he shouldn't be going up against or things that aren't actually there.
Very
And
true.
and yeah, so that made sense. It's like ideally, yeah, they could go hunt all this down and get rid of it. But I think Naomi, as a Belter, like you mentioned, has been living in reality a lot more than non-Belters, just people who are struggling to get by. Those are the people who are closest to reality, closest to how things are in the world. And the people who are more comfortable are further away from that and don't really, shouldn't really be making decisions for other people because of that. And
Sure.
so Naomi is very much aware of reality, seeing that no, this is out there now. Even at that point, early on, um,
Yeah.
was not deluding herself. Like she went along with it, like hoping for the best with James. Like she's inspired by James and wants him to be correct. But deep down, she knows that he is not going to succeed at his mission of purging the solar system of this stuff. So she's seen the Belters stepped on time and time again. This was the only move that really made sense for her and the Belters. So made sense to me too.
Yeah. And it's certainly a huge, we knew that was going to have huge implications later on. We didn't know exactly because they wouldn't have shown it otherwise if it was going to have huge implications. So that was, again, turning point for her character. One of those like kind of things you put a little bookmark in and say, all right, wonder what's going to happen there, because there's still a lot to happen in the season. And the word that you use, mind-blowing thing that happens right after all of this is we get the scene on Ganymede of we'll call her Gunny, I believe is what she goes by.
We could call her Bobby. That'll be
Bobby.
her. Yeah,
Yeah, we
what
go
she goes
Bobby.
by mostly.
Yeah, Bobby. I like Gunny though as well, just because it's fun. But yeah, Bobby. We get introduced to her character. I believe again. I don't think that's necessarily the first time we see her. I believe we see her right away at the beginning of the season with some exercises in episode 1. But to say that she thinks she's getting attacked. And this is what I'm thinking back as I'm talking through what was going through my mind. I remember sitting on my couch and watching the scene unfold, and I'm like, all right, so something, they're running over the edge, something's happening. All right, cool. And then I see this like figure come over the horizon. I'm like, all right, so they're shooting at this thing, blah, blah, blah. It's like, whatever. And then, I'm like, see the way it's running. I'm like, that's not human. That kind of looks like a Sasquatch or something like that. Like that's like literally what I'm thinking.
It's a space Sasquatch.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, this is like what is going on right now?
Yeah.
And then of course everything unfolds. She looks up, she sees the drone. She's trying to figure out what's happening. They lose their comms. They get attacked, and we see what I wrote down at the time. These are the notes I wrote down live as I was watching. So proto-molecule monster in her face. Again, mind-blowing moment, because I was like, oh, okay, we're really going into the proto-molecule. I was expecting this to be drawn out a lot in terms of like what we might see in terms of like the potential, but I was not expecting a manifestation of a humanoid proto molecule. So that to me was just like, I remember that episode ended and I was just like, okay, like we've crossed a threshold for sure. To your point, a little on the sci-fi side, which I love because again, it's grounded and it's not over like overly mystical or anything like that or magical. Like it makes sense with what's going on. But again, super insane moment. What did you think as a again alien lover when you saw that? Were you ecstatic? Were you
Oh
excited? Were
yeah,
you
it struck me very similarly to bringing up Game of Thrones again, but really like this is what Game of Thrones should have been in terms of story development, character development, and political intrigue. But it struck me the same way, like seeing the Ice King for the first time, where it's
mm,
like, oh, there's a lot more going on in the story than I thought I knew.
yeah.
And it was very much the same. So I'm like, okay, oh, what is it doing on this little tiny moon? Not sure why there would be an alien here. I know that people have been experimenting with the protomolecule, but
Yeah.
this seems like an unlikely thing to have happened by experimenting with it. Because at first I was like, well, maybe accidentally some of this like binded with a human, but we saw exposure to the protomolecule on Eros with people, and they didn't really have this happen to them.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I was like, all right, I'm on board. Again, it was a 1-2 punch of
Yep.
having, Eros impact Venus and then having this moment really built the hype that I had for the show.
Yeah. And it was again, and it was another moment where when that happened, I was like, that could have been an end of a season. Like that last
Hmm.
shot could have been the end of a season. And we're like 6, 7 episodes in. And I'm just like,
Yep.
again, I was just like, this is crazy and this is
Yep.
awesome. So even just to at the beginning of the episode when you said like, oh, this season's towards the bottom in terms of like, where it stands in the hierarchy. I'm like, but so many crazy things happen in the season. So I'm just like even more excited to
Seriously,
keep going because
it's so true though. I would put this definitely bottom half for sure.
so that makes it great. So, and another interesting part about that whole event happening, which of course we'll get to, unravels a lot of things. Ganymede, from my understanding, is a moon that is jointly occupied by Earth and Mars. There's
Hmm.
I believe they are patrolling the borderline in terms of where it happened. So that unleashes a whole thing in terms of they think there's an attack happening. Earth attacked
Yep.
Mars, Mars attacked blah blah. They're trying to figure out what's going on. There's the giant attack above Ganymede with the
Yep.
giant mirror breaking. Um, so we get to see that, and we're like, okay, like crap is hitting the fan. Maybe this war that they've been talking about is finally going to happen.
Hmm.
We get to see kind of both sides of that, and then we also get to see shortly after. And the reason I brought this up is because one of my favorite characters of the show so far, we get to see Dawes again on
Sure.
Tycho when they're trying to figure out what's going on with all these refugees. He comes to kind of be the, the hero, the suave
Hmm.
guy, swashbuckler is kind of how I view him, come in and kind of be the representation, the voice of the Belters, and kind of him and Fred Johnson go at it a little bit. And he kind of puts Fred Johnson in his place in terms of being like, you're not a real Belter. You're not this. I really understand what's going on. But yeah, what did you think? I mean, I just love his character. I
I
love that
love
actor.
Dawes.
So I
I
was just
love
like, as soon as
Dawes.
he walked in, I was just like,
And
heck yeah, man. Like,
again, he's like completely right. Fred Johnson,
yeah,
he's an adopted son of the belt. He's
for
not really
sure.
one of them. I mean, he is one of them, but not in the same way like Dawes, and he's really built this legacy, this legend around himself. He has a lot of respect. So does Fred Johnson for other reasons, but
Yeah.
seeing those two, anytime I see those two, going head to head with each other, love watching it.
Yeah. Another reason I bring that up is because a major plot point is that he ultimately, when he finds out about this scientist, Cortazar, being held by Holden and
Mhm.
Fred Johnson, who he's giving them information, he ultimately does abduct Cortazar away and uses his Belter influence on the young Belter. I forget his name. Um,
Diego, one of the
Diego.
most Diogo or yeah, whatever his name is, he is so overused. He's like anytime there's something happening and they just need, a belter character to like be
he
there. It's always
he's
Diogo.
certainly a little over the his belter accent is a little over the top. It's like basically Jamaican. It's basically Jamaican at that point.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like in terms of that's his accent. But yeah, he's a little overused. But again, he's exploited to ultimately help the Belters take Cortazar. So
Mhm.
another huge moment in terms of the Belters trying to take everything into their own hands. So they have the nukes technically with Fred Johnson.
Mhm.
They have Cortazar now. So they're
I will say
apparently,
one thing
yeah,
that
go for it.
Cortazar, like he's a really fascinating character.
Yeah,
Like we were talking about the other dude that was killed, I forget his name. But the head guy, the head scientist or the head
Dresden.
overseer, Dresden, he was killed and he had a bunch of answers. And then we know Cortazar can tell us a lot more. And then he's like removed off the stage and we don't see him again for a while.
Yeah,
Another one of those things where I'm like, oh shoot, I was really hoping to follow through there and find out what was
yeah,
going on.
yeah. That's a
And
good point too. I kind of thought the same thing. Like, oh yeah, he's just gonna be with them for a while, and then
mhm.
that'll
And it
be,
was fun watching, the sort of similarities between he and Amos, where Amos also is a sociopath,
yeah,
not a lobotomized sociopath, like somebody didn't go into his brain to like remove his empathy, but because of things that have happened to him, he doesn't have that anymore either. So it's like, well, maybe that's kind of what I was thinking, where it's like maybe they're gonna try to fix Cortazar, and in doing so, they can maybe help Amos too. Like that was one line of
yeah,
thought I had watching all that unfold.
very,
But
yeah,
alas, nothing.
right. But certainly he identified more with Cortazar than anybody else.
Mhm.
Obviously, way more than James Holden or Fred Johnson in terms of these idealistic type of guys. So, very good point that you bring up. So, this next part, very fascinated to talk to you about this because this was a uh, emotionally a very interesting part for me.